Howdy. Thanks for listening to Let the Movie Speak. Before we get started, we'd like to ask a favor of you.
It's a simple favor. If you could just rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen, that might help other ears get into our ecosystem here and hear another episode. Anyway, enjoy the show.
That's the last time she ever saw him alive. And that's the last time you'll ever see him alive. What happened to David Kentley changed my life completely, and the lives of 7 others.
Let the movie speak.
Welcome back, everybody, to Let the Movie Speak, the podcast where we try to answer that titular question. And I'm Travis.
I'm Justin.
And we are so happy to have an awesome guest with us today. His name is Ben. He's from another podcast on movies called 3 Films and a Podcast. Ben, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Really happy to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah. Ben and I met for the first time via Zoom for an episode. I was able to pop in on for 3 Films and a Podcast on Barry Lyndon, and it was super awesome. You should go seek it out. Ben, what are you guys up to right now on 3 Films and a Podcast?
We are into our Spielberg round, so we're going to be talking about AI and Close Encounters and Ready Player One. The basis of the podcast is that we come up with a theme, and all 3 of us each try to pick a movie that we haven't seen that relates to that. We've kind of been going over directors. We're Spielberg now. We just got done with Kubrick. You came on for Barry Lyndon, which was super awesome. And before that, we actually did Hitchcock. So, yeah, we're just getting through our directors right now.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I had the idea to have you, one of you or many of you on for this was because you guys had just done that Hitchcock series, but you didn't touch on Rope, right? Which Hitchcock movies did you guys cover?
Oh man, on the spot. North by Northwest, Vertigo, and Strangers on a Train.
Okay. And I've heard in reading and doing some background stuff that this movie and Strangers on a Train holds some similarities and some commonalities, story-wise at least.
Yeah, and also Farley Granger was in both of them. So when he came on screen, I saw the name. I was like, wait, I remember that guy. So, yeah.
Yeah, he has a very distinctive face. He looks like the guy who plays... Justin, who's that guy from Twin Peaks? The dad.
McLaughlin?
No, the dad.
No.
The dad. The one.
Oh, Weiss? What's his name?
Yeah.
This is lame podcasting.
No, that's fine. He has crazy eyebrows and eyes like that guy. The guy who plays... what's his name? Leland something. Palmer. There it is. We're
There
Twin
it
Peaks
is.
experts, obviously. But yeah. He's got a little Leland Palmer nutso look to him, doesn't he?
Yeah, very recognizable face for sure.
Justin, how are things up your way?
Oh, fantastic. Never been better. Peace on Earth. Everything is good to go.
Okay. Is it Christmas time? I didn't think it was.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know where you guys are, but here it's Christmas.
Excellent. Okay. Well, maybe you'll have a Christmas movie to talk about when we tell the folks what we watched this week. Okay, Justin, what Christmas movie did you watch this week?
Jingle All the Way, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Super duper classic, one of the best. Just a cinematic triumph.
Got to get that Turbo Man doll. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, what I'm gonna do what's called in the industry a hard pivot.
Yeah.
Activate the emergency brake and kill the ignition. I actually watched The Last Days, which is a documentary from 1998, produced by Steven Spielberg about a group of Hungarian Jews who actually survived the Holocaust, including Tom Lantos, former congressman from California. It goes without saying, right? I can't recall a lot of things I've seen about the Holocaust, whether fictional or of the documentary or nonfiction realm, that are bad. There's just so many lessons. I think that it sucks to always watch this stuff. Travis, we bring up Schindler's List every chance we get, just about. But Yeah, I don't think it doesn't get old. And while I certainly don't want to watch or read about this kind of stuff every day, I think it is kind of a critical component. If I can get super serious for just 1 second, just of maintaining your humanity, and realizing that there's not a lot that keeps people from doing really bad things. So would highly recommend it. If you haven't seen it before, it's called The Last Days.
Nice. That's a good, actually, if we want to make not so hard of a pivot, we would have gone straight from that into Rope, but let's not and say we did. Ben, what did you watch this week, man?
Well, this week, as I mentioned, we started Spielberg, so I watched Close Encounters for the first time, which was
Nice.
a treat. It was actually the movie I picked. I picked the Spielberg ground specifically to shoehorn Close Encounters in there. So, it was great. I love that movie. That was awesome. And then I just this past weekend watched the new Bo Burnham special called Inside, which came out on Netflix.
Yeah.
I'm a big Bo Burnham fan. So, he shot it all during quarantine, and you just kind of get to see someone's kind of mental demise, throughout the year that we all kind of went through, and he turned it into a comedy special. So it was great. I highly recommend it if you're into stand-up comedy.
Nice. I just read someone's tweet about that was like, if anyone in the future wants to see what quarantine felt like, just watch the Bo Burnham special.
Yeah, I would agree with that a lot. And honestly, I feel like it came out at the right time where we kind of have a light at the end of the tunnel, because if this came out like pre-election or pre-announcement of vaccines, it may have just been too depressing. But now that we can kind of see like the end, hopefully in sight, it's like, okay, I can deal with this right now.
Yeah, it's that whole thing about like it's too soon to joke about it. Well, it's not anymore, thank goodness.
Yes.
Hopefully. All right, nice. I watched for the first time in its entirety Ocean's 11 by Steven Soderbergh, and I followed it up right after, like the very next minute, I put on Ocean's 12, because they're on actually 11, 12, and 13, and 8, which is the new one with the all-female cast. They're all on HBO Max, and I was like, okay, I'll finally watch this. I've never seen it. So Ocean's 11, everyone in the world other than me has seen this movie, but it's like kind of a classic heist setup with a ridiculously overstuffed cast. George Clooney, Brad Pitt, among others, Matt Damon, and it's spoiler alert, it's really fun. And what this movie I think does best is just it. Steven Soderbergh knew exactly what he had in the charisma of all those leads, and he gives them all stuff to do, all the time. That's just fun to watch. There's some character development stuff in there. It's kind of light on that. So if you want to just have fun with the movie, I'm sure that's what that's the bullseye they were all shooting for, was just a fun romp. It does manage, I think, in the end to throw in a nice kind of romantic arc that fits the tone of the movie and kind of lands the plane, figuratively speaking, with Julia Roberts and George Clooney's character. So yeah, Ocean's 11, great. Straight into Ocean's 12. Here's the thing. The cast is still awesome. It's the entirely the same cast, and the charisma's still there, and the fun is still there, but it's unintelligibly convoluted. I think what they the bump in the road for that movie is they felt like more twists and turns were needed to sort of build upon the first one. And it just does things that don't make any sense. The heists in it, plural, are way more complicated, and they do more out of sequence narrative structure stuff. You see them start a heist, and then it cuts to the aftermath, and then they go back and show you a bunch of stuff. It's just messier, So it's I would say it's equally fun with the characters and the actors in those characters' skins, but the story is just kind of a mess, honestly. So worth watching, but I don't think it's nearly as rewatchable as Ocean's 11. Justin, have you seen the 12?
Oh yeah.
Okay. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's unnecessarily obtuse. Because I think a lot of that stuff that they kind of tried for storytelling and kind of gimmicky things were all done. Everything that's in 12 is in 11. In kind of a Guy Ritchie sense, if you compare Lock, Stock, and Snatch, but it just is. Not as good because it's abused, I think, in my opinion, in 12 at least. So yeah, I would agree with you. I will say if you're going to watch 13, which I hope you do, I think they listen to that criticism to a fault. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on 13 if you're going to watch that.
I'm going to watch it tonight, I think, after we're done recording, because I just want to keep the first two really fresh and then just see what they did. Because it does look like, just from the setup, right? Like they brought in Al Pacino, which doesn't seem like a bad idea at all, in my opinion, for the series or the movie. But it's like back to Vegas, more casino based, like it's stripped down. And,
right.
Yeah. Well, that was what we watched this week. I think it's time we ventured back into the 40s, into the post-war late 40s, and we talk a little bit about Rope. So we have 1948, Alfred Hitchcock, Jimmy Stewart, as Justin already mentioned. And this comes at a spot in Hitchcock's career, which is interesting. Pretty much every spot in Hitchcock's career is pretty interesting. He was like so incredibly prolific from like 1928 all the way through, you know, the early 60s, when he really had like some of those really big hits, like, you know, Psycho and The Birds and all those. 48 comes just a hair before his real like super streak. You know, you've got things like Spellbound, Notorious, The Lady Vanishes early on in his career. Year after, he did like 3 movies a year, like two movies a year average, but he did 3 movies a year at times. Rope comes in 48, right before things like Stage Fright, Strangers on a Train, Dial M for Murder comes in 54, Rear Window comes in 54, To Catch a Thief, The Man Who Knew Too Much. So he definitely goes on a Jimmy Stewart run. But what is your guys' Hitchcock experience? Justin, I don't know exactly how much you've seen. I know we both appreciated Hitchcock from time to time, but do you have like a favorite Hitchcock and all of that?
Yeah, I grew up with Justin's mama was and is a big Hitchcock fan. I remember when we moved into my house when I was like 12, the old folks that had lived there before us had, both died in that house, and thankfully we did not inherit their corpses, but we didn't inherit a lot of their belongings, like IRS tax return documents from the 70s and just a bunch of weird stuff. A saddle was there. There was a lot of stuff. Anyway, in addition to all that was a huge plethora of VHS tapes. And my mom is not really one to hoard anything, so she was like, "Oh, we can just get rid of it. We don't need this. This is garbage, you know." And it was like, "Oh, okay." But then, we're going through the VHS tapes, and there's Hitchcock's was it Rebecca? I think it was Rebecca.
Oh yeah.
And she was like, "Oh, we can keep that. That's fine."
Yeah.
So I watched a lot of Hitchcock growing up. I think my favorite Hitchcock film, which I don't think I've seen since I was a younger lad, is The Birds.
Yeah.
There was just something that really, even as a kid, really appealed to me about this concept that just avians would be murderous to people. It just sounded very uniquely terrifying in a very natural, but, obviously unnatural in some kind of way. So, yeah, if I had to pick a favorite, I think it'd still be The Birds.
So I saw The Birds at, there's this theater in the Bay here in Oakland called the Paramount Theater. And it's this really cool old Art Deco theater that was built like in the 20s, and they've restored it but kept the original integrity. And they show, I'm not sure if they're back into this yet post COVID, but I hope that theater doesn't go away. I hope they keep doing this. They do like retro screenings of all these awesome old movies, and when you go, you pay like $5 for a ticket. And they do like a Deca win, spin the wheel game beforehand, and there's an organ player, and then they play, an awesome old movie. It's just a really fun like time, a good like cultural experience to like bring you back to something like what watching movies was back in the day. Anyway, I went with a group of friends to see The Birds, and I was so excited because I was like, oh man, it's The Birds, it's the Paramount Theater, this is going to be absolutely perfect. And it was the worst theater crowd I've ever sat with. They so like The Birds, if you are into Hitchcock and you're into this type of thing, The Birds is not like silly. You know what I mean? Like you just know what it is. It's old. So like effects are what they are. And Hitchcock was doing literally the most with anything he could, right? If you've seen any Hitchcock, even our movie today, I would argue, like, you know, he makes the best and most like ambitious use of space and even effects and characters and whatever. And so like people are literally watching this movie where birds are like, you know, swooping down and pecking people's eyes out, and like people are being murdered and they're just cackling, laughing. And,
Perfect.
Yeah, it was it was terrible. I was like 30 minutes into the movie, I could tell, oh, this audience doesn't get it at all, and I'm the only one here who actually wants to watch this like for what it is. And I was just pissed off the entire rest of the movie. I watched the
Is that your worst theater experience?
yeah, no, bar none, I think. And I've had we've been with some crowds, Justin. that haven't gotten the movie, but that was the worst because it was like I was like one of like a handful of people in there who weren't like just thinking like, oh, this is a parody movie, like this is this is like a Roger Corman, you know, like crappy B movie, and it's like it's just not, you know what I mean? Like, I was the angriest I've ever been in a movie theater.
How long did you last before you ordered everyone to get out of the theater?
I sat through the whole thing, but was angry for like the latter 3/4 of it, and then when we left, we were with a couple friends. This was the funniest part. Me and one other person who I was with was like me. We were like, that was crap. I want to kill myself, you know? And then the other two friends that we were with were like, oh my gosh, it was so funny. And we looked at them and we were like, I can't speak to you anymore.
We're no longer friends.
No, yeah. It was like I lost, you know, percentage points of respect for those people.
Ben, what about you? Do you have a horrific theater experience that sticks out to you?
Thankfully, nothing that's like made me walk out or anything like that. I do remember shortly before, the one I think of the most is shortly before Baby Driver. We were sitting behind these people, and you know, Sony comes up on the screen, and I hear the words Sony. I was like, oh my god, is this gonna happen the whole movie? No. And then the opening shot is the car, you know, coming into frame, the tire coming into frame, and I swear to God, the next word was Subaru. I was like, holy shit, is this gonna be the whole movie where this woman just says every word that's on screen? Luckily, that movie is captivating enough that I was able to make it through the whole thing. So I haven't had a horrible theater experience. At least I've repressed it if I did. So
yeah,
hallelujah.
Justin, we had a pretty up and down crowd when we saw Us, didn't we?
Oh my gosh, that was pretty bad, Travis. I don't know what was, and it was packed to the rafters.
Yeah,
with all of those people.
Yeah,
that didn't get it. Yeah, they did. They kind of thought it was parody too.
Yeah,
it's not. That's a horror movie. What's wrong with these people?
Yeah. This podcast exists so we can just talk down about every theater goer ever. I hope that's clear at this point.
No, you know, for me, I think I don't know that it was the worst audience by any stretch, but the kind of most surreal moment in a theater might have been when I went to see No Country for Old Men, and the credits roll, and you know, Tommy Lee Jones says his last line, and the credits come up.
Justin, I was with you for this, and I told this story on Ben's podcast, but please tell it for our audience.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm sorry.
Yes, please,
wow.
Yes.
No. So, it's just funny that you're bringing it up again. It's a killer story. Please continue.
Now I can believe Travis. I questioned him before, but now I believe him.
Yeah, good. That's really why we're doing this, Ben. Travis was like, hey, he didn't buy it, man. We got to get our stories straight. So we sat down, ironed out some more details, and stand by for them now. So anyway, we were sitting there, and there's these two guys behind us, and one guy says to the other, like, well, what'd you think? And the other guy says, we should have seen Hitman. Oh, okay. So you can leave now that the movie's over. It was just very, very sad. I just remember feeling pretty dead inside.
Yeah.
And it was not the work of Joel and Ethan Coen that time.
Yeah, and it's immediately like, yeah, you should have seen Hitman. You should have seen Hitman. No question. All right. I think my favorite Hitchcock is probably Dial M for Murder, which is super in line with Rope, the movie we are talking about today. I realize it's not like Rope and Dial M and like things like that. They're not necessarily his most lauded or maybe iconic like visual pieces. But what I think Hitchcock does really well is all that weird stuff, right? Like Vertigo, even North by Northwest has some kind of surrealist stuff in it. Psycho obviously started an entire genre of slasher films that didn't really exist in Hollywood before he came in and broke ground there. But I really like when he has a tight script and a mystery of sorts, and the characters are more under a microscope. which is certainly what Rope is going for. We'll mention, I'm sure, in passing several times, this was adapted from a play. Hitchcock was inspired to do the technical. His technical approach to this movie was inspired by seeing a kind of a broadcast version of it on TV where somebody did something kind of similar, but mostly this is interesting actually. Their goal in that televised thing was to keep the chest in view in every shot of the play that was being televised. So in every shot, the camera kind of moves around, but the chest is always somewhere in the frame, which is interesting, for a filmed play production. And what else here? We have, kind of a similar structure to things like Dial M for Murder. This film is different from a lot of Hitchcock stuff in that it takes place like in real time, like as close to real time as is possible. It is actually the original story supposedly is inspired by a real murder that took place at the University of Chicago by a couple of students that, the playwright found that, wrote the play, and then this movie came to exist after the play. And just some a fun tidbit, because I know we're going to get into the one shot or long shot aspect of how this thing feels to watch. Just for modern audiences and modern listeners to this podcast, 10 minutes was about how much a film camera could do back in the day. Like it would run out of film and need to be reloaded. So you'll notice, having watched this, Ben and Justin, or if you're listening along, that like the longest a shot will get without some kind of transition or cut, there are a couple cuts in the movie, is 10 minutes, because they would go kind of as long as they could go with like blocking and choreography and moving things around technically. And they did max out the 10 minutes of those cameras a couple times. So yeah, I think that's a good way to get into the conversation. This movie is all real time, kind of one shot feel. So that alone makes it feel different than other Hitchcock. But let's get into the meat and potatoes of it all. What is it saying? So Justin, why don't you give us a plot summary of this thing?
Well, like you said, it's a pretty brisk movie, and I think that's reflected in the very appropriately narrow scope of the plot. You've got two young men, Brandon Shaw, Philip Morgan, I think are their names, and they, in the very opening shot of the movie, at least once credits are done, rolling their way through, they strangle with a rope. I'll let you try to figure out where the title comes from. A classmate of theirs, David Kentley, I think, in their apartment. And they don't murder him because they have any necessarily personal problems, or it's not going to benefit them really in any way, but it's sort of as some kind of extreme Nietzschean exercise in proving that they are like supermen, that they are so far above society that they can pull off, if they plan it carefully enough and dot their I's and cross their T's, that they can pull off a murder and no one will know. And so to celebrate the kind of arrogance of that act, they have arranged to have a dinner party immediately following, as murderers are known to do. And so a bunch of their friends are coming over, and, well, not a bunch, I should say. There's a carefully selected small group of people come over, the most interesting of whom I think is, and most integral to the plot, is Jimmy Stewart's Rupert, it's something.
Cadell?
Rupert something. Cadell, okay. They call him Rupert usually. Well, don't let Rupert know that.
Yes, exactly.
Is a famous line, I think, that keeps getting reiterated. And so anyway, that's really it. It's the chest is in plain view, and they do put him in a chest, just like in the play. And then they want to set out actually dinner on top of the chest. And from the get-go, though, you get that that Brandon, I think, has regrets about this murder and is
Right.
not comfortable at all with what they're doing, while Philip is like, hey, old chap, it's going to be fine. One day I'll be reincarnated as Leland Palmer. And it's a really weird deleted scene that Hitchcock was way ahead of his time.
Way ahead of his time.
Yeah, so anyway, it's just kind of a whole cat and mouse game, and, Rupert, of course, is trying to, he becomes suspicious, and then hijinks ensue with an
Ensue.
SH.
Yes. All right. Yeah, that's it. It's a tight little story. It's one location other than one exterior shot where we do get the famous Hitchcock cameo. If you blink and you'll miss it kind of a thing. He's on the street there as per usual. So Ben, having watched some Hitchcock for 3 films on a podcast and probably some on your own, what was your overall impression of Rope?
I enjoyed it, and I think I respected it on the most as like on the production value of it, of trying to do this as the oneer, as telling like a stage play through film. I think that's what I enjoyed the most about it, is like what it took for them to achieve that by having sets, roll in and out, things along those lines. I don't know, as far as like it being a Hitchcock movie, my personal favorite one is, I love Psycho. Like that's my favorite of his. Yeah. And it feels like the answer that you give when you have never watched a Hitchcock movie, because he directed that. It's like, oh, I love Psycho too. But to me, that's just like one of his obvious better ones. But this is obviously kind of an early one. There were similarities with Strangers on a Train besides Farley Granger. So yeah, I'm glad I watched it. I appreciate what he did, like once again, kind of setting things up for the future of like, we can do a movie with a oneer now, someone can do it better, like we have the technological advances now that we can kind of pull that off and make it look seamless. So I'm glad I watched it. I think it was a great achievement.
Yeah, I think we can get into characters and some story twists and turns if we want to later on down the line. But let's just take a moment to address what is, I think, sort of the elephant in the room for this movie, which is what Ben mentioned. It's a one-shot movie for to a degree. Let's say it's a lot of long shots, transitioned or stitched together, not really with like lots of snappy, fancy editing, but with camera movements that almost make it look like there isn't editing. So I think people's opinion and the way that they digest this, their reception of it overall, is probably like the hinge point of that is, okay, did that work for you or did it not work for you? And I think we might find a dividing line here, like critics have since the movie came out. It had mixed critical reception, and it all kind of centered around this idea of, well, was what Hitchcock did technically, like, was it good or bad? Was it a monumental achievement, or was it kind of a gimmick? And Hitchcock himself would come around to have his own reaction to that question. James Stewart, I think, is quoted in an interview as mentioning that specifically. I'll say, for me, I am a theater guy. Like, I love going to the theater. It's probably my favorite version of sitting and watching a story be told. So film is a very close second. And so for me, this is playing into my biases. This is playing into my hand. And I think, we've seen a couple plays into movies on our show already, Justin. And it's hard not to talk about the adaptation process and what they did to make it work or not work. For me, this works. I think it's obvious, and it is sort of pervasive visually, and it requires you to follow kind of one point of view at a time, which is a thing in theater called selective focus. It's like when there's a brighter light on this character and not on the rest of the set. You can definitely feel that like Hitchcock is using those maneuvers to get you to pay attention to one thing at a time. This case with like a single camera feel, it almost never cuts from one person to a reaction shot. But for me, this works. Justin, what about you?
I'm sorry to say, for me, it works a little less, and that's not because I don't love the theater. I mean, I think clearly you do have an appreciation for it that some would liken to a medical condition. Others would just call, a strong liking for it. But no, I certainly don't have the depth of experience that you do with the theater. But I have yet to see, and the movie's probably out there somewhere, I've yet to see a play adapted into a film that is better than the play.
Yeah.
Doubt comes to mind.
Right.
I saw that on the stage first, and then saw the film, the Philip Seymour Hoffman, Meryl Streep, abuses in the Catholic Church movie.
Couple of real lightweights in that cast. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, acting was the problem,
Yeah.
as Roger Ebert complained. No, I mean, it was a fantastic movie, right? I don't mean to. You have those two heavyweights in there, like you said. The problem is not to me with the story at all. The story's powerful, and it still works as a film. I think it's still a good movie. I just am of the opinion that if you're gonna adapt, and that includes kind of anything for me. If you're gonna cover a song, if you're a band and you're gonna cover a song, if you're a playwright and you're gonna try to make a film into a play, or vice versa, in my opinion, it's got to be better. You have to have kind of a new spin on it. Not that it has to be, totally like, in this one, Jimmy Stewart's played by a man in a chicken suit, or, something stupid. It just, it has to me, there has to be a good reason. The impetus for making that transition has to be really solid. You have to see something that says, I see something, I see some potential in here that cannot be mined on the stage, but I can fully explore that on film. And so, yeah, for me, I think this movie, I wouldn't have even noticed it was a stage adaptation if not for the kind of preference that the camera takes for shooting things as if it is a play. Mm-hmm. And so while I get where that comes from, I don't quite get why Hitchcock thought that was the way to go, because he obviously has a beautiful eye, like we talked about in our 30s episode, Travis.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a bummer to me, because I don't think, a couple not scene changes, but shot changes to close-ups or to whatever, it's not going to cause the audience to go like, oh, wait a minute, what's happening? Did 10 hours just pass? I think it would have been pretty clear we're still at the dinner party or afterwards. But it's just kind of I would agree with Ben. It's a cool technical achievement. I'm glad Hitchcock did that, because maybe in a way he paved the way where we get to some of these movies that have tried that same concept and taken it to another level, for better or for worse. But for me, it's just it doesn't quite merit the film being shot in the way it does.
Okay, yeah, and I think that's a pretty common take. What'd you have, Ben?
Oh, I was going to say, it feels like maybe it was just taking on too much, which sounds weird to say about Hitchcock, but, I think there are some great movie adaptations. I can't speak to the stage performance, 'cause I haven't seen them, but, like, I love 12 Angry Men or Glengarry Glen Ross. Like, I think those work really well as films, but again, if we tried to show all those in a oneer, that kind of takes away from it, and maybe it becomes a little too distracting. I think that's the issue here. Like, I think if this, was a different movie that was made to be, all taken in one shot, then that works well. Or if we're just doing, the adaptation, I think it could have worked, even better. But yeah, like you said, it's just, we're not going to lose our minds if all of a sudden we go into a tight shot of someone's face. It's like, oh, okay, well, 2 hours have passed now, so what am I supposed to do? So it just felt like maybe it was too much to do for the same movie.
Yeah, and I could totally see that. Like, it's, there's a big difference between something like this that's like, okay, this was a play, and Hitchcock is kind of trying to shoot it to have it feel like a play. And that's kind of the whole purpose of the real-time one-shot stuff. Mm-hmm. And, something like, 1917 or Birdman, right? Like, those were movies conceived from the germ of the idea was like, okay, this is going to be a oneer. This is what this is going to be. And so there's certainly, a purity to those that Rope doesn't necessarily have, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't have, transitions where, like the camera finds its way into a wall or a suit jacket or some other opaque object in order to create those transitions. I mean, this is like 1948, and Hitchcock's, I think, being as freaking creative as he can, but it is what it is. So let's talk about the people in the lens. We have a nice, tidy, small cast. Again, plays generally have smaller casts. So like thinking about like Wait Until Dark, if you guys have ever seen Wait Until Dark, the same kind of story where, like, you can tell it's adapted from a play. It's not a one shot or anything, but it is one apartment for the most part with just a few exteriors. So we have Dick Hogan, who plays David Kentley for 4 milliseconds while he's dying. He's great. Never seen anybody be strangled better than that. But let's get on to the living, breathing folks. John Dahl and Farley Granger as Brandon and Philip. These are our murderers, and as Justin pointed out, different people. You know what I mean? Like immediately, they both take part in this kind of heinous on-screen act. And I know there was some controversy around that shot of them strangling him because it's pretty hardcore. Especially, I mean, for today, I would look at that and be like, yuck. But 1948, I can imagine audiences. That's the first thing you see, and I think I read one critic who was like, I couldn't get the bad taste out of my mouth from that shot for the rest of the movie. So definitely Hitchcock not being afraid to be visceral, which would continue to be one of his signature moves. You know, we wouldn't have blood in the shower in Psycho if it weren't for that instinct. But Justin, talk to me about Brandon and Philip performances and the way they're used in the story. What'd you think?
I mean, yeah, they're both the cast is not the problem at all in this movie. I think my only criticism, which I again I'm just echoing Ben here, but you know, just the idea of trying to shoot this as a one shot as much as possible. That's kind of my only issue. And so, hermeneutically, if we can use big words, I think Brandon and Philip are really compelling because I don't think this movie would be, or this play would be half as interesting if they were both Brandons and they were both just like, yeah, murder's hecka cool, dude. Like, when's the next one, bro? You know, that would get old fast.
That would be a bummer.
Yes, it would be. So that Philip is immediately. That he immediately seems to regret it, and really like he kind of wants to get caught. You know, he gets drunk, he runs his mouth too much. You know, I think the guilt weighs heavily upon him.
Yeah.
In contrast, that was Brandon, who this whole movie is he just wants to be able to say, I pulled it off, I did it, I am superior because I murdered somebody and nobody else knows about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think they're both cast kind of perfectly. I definitely believe everyone in this movie, in this tiny cast, except for Dick Hogan. I mean, kind of lacking, you know. I'm just saying
he's kind of stiff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Real lifeless performance.
I mean, oh wow, how many can we do?
He's like a block of wood. No, that's not. He was inside.
Okay,
of wood.
I killed it. Sorry.
Okay.
I mean, they really drive this movie forward, and then James Stewart as Rupert just comes to kind of unravel everything.
Yes.
They are kind of a pressure cooker together, and then Jimmy Stewart says, "What happens if we take off the lid?" That's my Jimmy Stewart impression, by the way.
Spot on. I thought this was a clip from the movie. It's like, whoa, wait.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
We learned from our Mr. Smith Goes to Washington episode that we're going to pull a muscle if we really try to do a Jimmy Stewart. So anyway.
Yeah, I don't know what it ended up sounding like last time, but it was not James.
You turned into Sean Connery if
That's
memory
true.
serves.
Yes, I did. We won't put Ben through that.
Yeah. I do think there's an interesting thing here that's not, you know, this is, again, if it's based off of a play, it's going to be all like verbal stuff moving the train along. There's not going to be like explosions and lightning strikes, and you know, that's not what's going to move the story. It's going to be, like Justin said, the characters and the dialogue, right? So I think everybody is pretty great in this movie. If they weren't, it would stick out like a sore thumb because they just have a lot to do. The camera's right up in their mug for most of the movie, and they're typically like one person on camera or two people on camera at a time because of that single dolly movement thing that's going on. I do think there's an interesting like story. I wonder if this is in the play. You know, right after they kill David, Philip goes to turn the light on, right? And Brandon says no, like not just yet, right? And it's like this. I think it's a pretty clear. Perhaps it's too on the nose, but I don't know. For me, it wasn't played in a way that was like no, not the light. You know what I mean? It wasn't like some like melodramatic delivery. But I do like the idea that like he doesn't want any of this to be revealed, but whether that's his face or the chest or whatever. And then later on, that comes back up again. There's some specific thematic repetition there. Ben, what did you think about Jimmy Stewart? Because I think some of the kind of up and down conversation of casting in this movie throughout the years has been things like, Jimmy Stewart himself came out later on and said like, I wasn't cast properly in this movie, which is super interesting, I think.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, I usually save, the IMDb trivia till after I watch the movie. So as I'm watching, I was like, oh, this is really great. I personally think, John Dahl was the star of the movie. I think he obviously, he's one of the main protagonists anyway. But I think he just did a wonderful job. I thought, I don't know that Jimmy Stewart ever does a bad job by any means.
Yeah.
But then I read that same stuff that he had said. He's like, he was miscast, and immediately I was like, he was miscast, wasn't he? I'm like, I don't really know. I just like, if Jimmy Stewart thinks he was, I'm like, maybe he was, and in retrospect, it's like, yeah, this is like, it's a Wonderful Life guy. You know what I mean? Like all this kind of stuff. Like, I don't know if this is, yeah, maybe he wasn't the right person for this, but it's also hard because I don't know that he ever gives a bad performance. So I don't know. I'm curious who like Jimmy Stewart would have said like, oh, it should have been this person instead. Cause I think he pulled it off great. And with the other three Hitchcocks that he does, Rear Window and Vertigo, and he's perfect in those roles. So that totally makes sense. And so the fact that Jimmy Stewart could say that and make me wonder was like, maybe he was right. Maybe someone else could have been better in this role.
Yeah, Justin, I'm interested to hear your thoughts because, like Ben mentioned, Jimmy Stewart's like so beloved, you know what I mean? Like he's just like a great on-screen presence, but typically what we see is like he's the everyman, you know what I mean? He's
right.
Mr. Smith, he's George Bailey, he's the way more blue collar, salt of the earth kind of guy the audience can identify with. And in this, he's like everybody else in the movie, other than Janet, who even calls herself dumb. Like, why do I try to act so smart around all these people? But Jimmy Stewart is cut from the same cloth of like upper crust. There's an elitist, strain that goes through the ideology that brought these two dudes to feel like they were justified in killing him. And it comes from Jimmy Stewart's character, right? So what did you think of him in this role?
Well, I think these people, they are still people. And so I think their bias is like Hitchcock, said some things about this movie that weren't necessarily kind later. Like, yeah, it never really worked. Talking about just the techniques I think employed to try to make this film. And so I think in the same way with Jimmy Stewart, I was miscast. I don't know. It's like everyone just... I know that Jimmy Stewart, from what I could read anyway, not from talking to him personally through Medium, he seemed to indicate that he did not really enjoy making this movie because of, just the technicalities of like, okay, no, you have to go over there now. No, you have to move. The wall's coming up, Jimmy. Get out of the way. And so it sounds like it wasn't necessarily the most low stress kind of shooting.
I think he said something like this: the cameramen have to get it right on the shoot, not the actors, or something like that. Which is an interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So I don't know if maybe his experience just kind of soured him to the point that he thought like, well, everyone else is kind of taking a proverbial dump on this movie. I guess I will too. I kind of did expect going in, knowing the character that he was going to play, I kind of expected not to like him.
Yeah.
At least as that character, if that makes sense, to think that he was miscast. But honestly, I can't say after watching that's the same conclusion I came to.
Yeah.
I think he is believable, simply because, I mean, it is kind of shocking when Jimmy Stewart says things like, yeah, we should just murder people. Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah, it is.
Hang 'em high Tuesday, folks. Yeah. Kill them in their sleep. It's just kind of dark for Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah.
But that's kind of real life, too. I mean, when people say, at least generally, if people say psychotic things like that, or, I guess a kinder word would be edgy. If people say edgy things like that and we're like, I totally buy that. Well, that person's probably a serial killer and you should probably leave the room. So I kind of do buy that James is that character. And especially because I think it would be harder in a way to have a character that is, or an actor that is darker, do that turn that James does at the end. Because James can do that turn the best, right?
Oh my gosh.
Where he turns into like, your moral compass is crying out. I'm so tempted to try the Jimmy Stewart accent right now, Travis, but I just can't. I'm going to have to leave it to you. It'll be your job.
No, you're not.
But yeah, I think without him, then that final, monologue by him, that allows the movie to stay afloat. And I think in a different actor, that's a tall order for any actor. But I think James is the right man to pull it off.
Yeah, I agree. I this is not the first time I've seen this movie. I haven't watched it for some time, but I teach drama. It's one of the classes I teach, and I use that ending monologue as an example in class for my student actors, and it's funny to watch it separate and then to watch it in the context of the movie, because if you watch it separately, it plays like Jimmy Stewart. You know what I mean? Like it could be like what he's saying in that moment, the shock and awe, and his turn, which doesn't feel like a turn if you watch it in isolation. It just feels like him reacting as a righteous character. I think the beauty of a story like this is the ensemble cast working together when they're all so good like this. Really what this story kind of feels like is like Clue with lots fewer jokes. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
it has like similar entrance feeling, like, you know, like everybody's going to be here tonight, and then they enter one by one, and you get the introduction and you get a little sense of their character, and then they get put together in little subgroups and in the whole ensemble. And I think, Justin, what you mentioned is exactly right. Like, there's a way in which like this movie is not like laugh out loud funny, but it does have some fun kind of subtle humor in it, especially with like Mrs. Atwater, and like she can't remember the names of any movies or actors, and it's like that one person in that one something in that one thing or whatever. He like totally jabs at her, you know, in a passive aggressive but really comedic way, with kind of a glint in his eye, which like we've seen that Jimmy Stewart glint in his eye before, but it's always just been like wholesome pathos, you know. But in this movie, he transitions straight from that into the conversation that is like most sinister. You know what I mean? Like that conversation when they're all sitting with their plates, and he starts, and it seems like a joke, right? And Mr. Kentley even says like, I don't like this dark humor. And he's like, I'm not joking, you know? And that is, I don't know, man. I thought that was incredibly effective because it was coming from like the Tom Hanks of this generation. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's something like where he's like the knife just eases into the back, and instead of it being like, okay, it's Willem Dafoe or something, you know, and he's got the crazy in his eyes from moment one. So were there any other like specific moments, let's go to Ben, that like you felt built tension really well or like moved the mystery along in an interesting way?
Sorry, I just want to get one out of the way because you talked about the humor of it, and my favorite joke from this thing was like, what would you say to some champagne? Hello, champagne. It's like, that's a perfect line. That was so good.
It's
I really
fun.
enjoyed that.
Yeah.
The things I like that kind of build the tension are, you know, the Hitchcock things are, you know, like the kitchen door swinging open, and then you just see him like drop the rope in the drawer and close it. He's so good at building the suspense and the tension. And I think Farley Granger, honestly, getting more drunk throughout is kind of what was building the tension for me. Cause I'm like, what is he going to say? Like, I think he did a really good job of acting like a paranoid drunk person, you know, having been around some of those people before. It's like, yes, I have seen this before. And that for me is really what was building it, because Brandon seemed to be playing it so cool and calm. And, you know, I think he just got a little overconfident in himself too. It's like, yeah, bring him back up, you know, whatever. So for me, it was the Farley Granger role, like just getting more and more drunk, that was getting the suspense built up, you know, within me.
Yeah. Justin, what about you? What moments or exchanges or there's no sequences, it's all one sequence, but I mean to say like what in
the
your
movie, that was my favorite sequence.
Oh, good.
There's two that come to mind, and one is when Mrs. Wilson is clearing off all the dinner plates, it's just focused on the top of the chest as it keeps getting barer and barer, and
Such
it's
a
like,
great
oh
shot.
Man, they about to open it up and find the truth, but it doesn't happen obviously then. But for just pure anticipation and suspense, I don't think that moment is quite rivaled. In a much subtler way, I don't know if this is intentional or not, but if it is, I really appreciate that at the end. Okay, so Rupert comes back up, impersonating Jimmy Stewart, and he, you know, confronts them essentially, and you know, wants to make his suspicions validated, and comes to the conclusion, these guys murdered this dude. So of course Brandon, ever the prepared man, has a snub-nosed revolver. So Jimmy wrestles this. I'm saying Jimmy again. It's Rupert, guys. I'm sorry. You know, they're in a wrestling match over the pistol, and one round goes off. Jimmy gets the gun. Gosh dang it. Rupert gets the gun. It doesn't matter.
Rupert Stewart, James Cadell, they're one and the same. Yes.
And so he has control of the weapon, and you know, he's got everyone at bay, and he's like, nah, I mean, here's what's going to happen. You guys are going to die. You're going to hang for your crimes, essentially. He opens the window, and he fires 3 shots. If I counted right anyway. He fires 3 shots out into the air. So what I find really interesting about that, I'd have to go back and look. I don't know, but most stub nose guns of that era are either a 5 or a 6 shot.
Right.
And so that leaves him with either 1 or 2 rounds left. And so I think that I just find the implied tension of that, and maybe I'm really stretching here. I apologize if I am, but the implication there to me is if it's a 5 shot, he's got 1 left.
Yeah.
So that one of them can kill themselves if they want to, and he's got 2 left in case he needs to take them out if they try to murder him. So just the tension is not at all gone once this movie is done. And in the sense that that last shot is just beautiful, I think.
Yeah.
That everyone reverts back to their I don't know, their most primal for those characters. It's their most primal desires or their natural states. Rupert is ever the intellectual. He goes to just sit down and think, and Philip goes to play the piano and he plays that, and Brandon is. I think he is. What? Gosh,
he makes
he's
another
doing
drink.
something else.
He just goes
yes,
to make a drink.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, because he has to be ever in control.
Yes.
And nothing is going to phase him. The cops are coming, and that's fine. So I don't know, man. I found that last scene / shot to just be really, really beautiful and full of a bunch of unexplored, but properly. I'm not asking for more from that, but I just love all the possible implications there.
Let me just talk about the last sequence since you're there right now. I think even if you don't like the one-shot stuff throughout the movie, and again, I could totally see how that would be more of a distraction than a helper for a viewer. It worked for me, but the ending monologue being in a one-shot format is, I think, the perfect choice, whether this movie has done it up until that point or not, because it starts with he whips open the top and the books fall off, and then you get a real justifiable reason for there to be blackness on screen, right? Like, that's not the camera zooming into a suit jacket. That's like a real obscuring of the lens. And then the camera does this amazing, just like it just scans upward, you know what I mean? And you see his face above the box and the gun in his hand. And from then on, that whole monologue where he, again, like Justin said, he's the character who changes in this movie because we see who he really is at the dinner party. And this monologue is his conscience exploding out of him when he has to come face to face with the reality of his concepts, of his ideology, of his, philosophy on life, So with the way the camera follows him around in that scene, the way it follows him to the window when he fires the shots, and then it just creeps backward on a dolly. As Justin said, they all find their positions. He rests the gun on top of the box. Brandon goes to sit at the piano. Philip goes to make his drink. The siren just gets louder and louder, and then bam, the movie's over. That's to me like a absolute Hall of Fame Hitchcock sequence and moment and selection of shots. And to a lesser degree, I also like a couple minor choices throughout the movie. It's pretty scoreless. You get score at the beginning, you get nothing in the middle huge chunk of the movie, and then just score at the end, which focuses you in on the dialogue and the details. But they do use, the piano from time to time is sort of like what Brandon does to busy himself when he's nervous. There's a great exchange between him and Rupert, where he goes over and he starts to ask him leading questions, and he turns the metronome on. And just the combination of his playing, which sort of increases in tension as he's having this conversation, the metronome, which is way off for the tempo that he's playing the piano, and Jimmy Stewart really bearing down on him. There's some real surgical tension drawing. I mean, Hitchcock did not earn the moniker the master of suspense for nothing. So I think even in this movie, which may be imperfect, you still see him flex big time those muscles. Anything else, guys, in here throughout the movie that you want to touch on that you liked or noticed that you thought was interesting? Ben?
I think we've really hit on all the points that I had, on my notes that I wanted to discuss. This really is, we brought up some really good points of, kind of the imperfections of it, but where you can still see the Hitchcock within the movie. Like you said, he's the master of suspense for a reason, and this movie, lives up to that.
And Justin, you got anything else?
I just really enjoyed Mrs. Atwater.
Yeah.
I think she deserves honorable mention. Perfect casting. No one is poorly cast in this movie. Again, exception of Dick Hogan. Really expected more out of him.
Seriously.
But that's okay. Just kept saying, like, when is he going to get out of there? When is he going to come, but it just doesn't happen. So that's my biggest beef.
Yeah, I thought he was going to burst out of that chest and do a musical number or
Yeah,
something.
or just be like, hey, what are you guys doing?
Just constantly corpsing on camera, It's ridiculous.
Yeah, no, but Mrs. Atwater, just the perfect idiot that thinks she is, the life of the party and an intellectual. Just a great contrast, I think, with, everyone plays a really interesting shade, I think. The closest that you have to two characters being the same are Brandon and Rupert, but by the movie's end, you can tell they're on different planets.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, just a shout out to Mrs. Atwater and her belovable buffoonery.
Yes, agreed. All right, let's get into the wrap up and answer the ever important question: is it worth your time? Ben, why don't you kick things off for us?
Yeah, I think this is definitely worth your time for sure. I think this is a movie, especially if you're like a Hitchcock, even if you're new to Hitchcock or if you're a completionist, like this is a good summary of what he can do. I'd say if someone wanted to learn about Hitchcock, this would be like one of the, probably 6 or 7 films. Like this is a good example of why he's the master of suspense and his control over the camera, because he does that throughout all his films, even though I believe this is his only oneer. So yeah, I think it's definitely worth your time, and I'm sure I'll be revisiting it.
Justin, how about you? How often would you rewatch it? Is it worth the people's time?
Definitely worth the people's time. It is Hitchcock after all, as implied many times, and in many ways, James Stewart is in this movie. Always worth your time. I'm probably not going to rewatch this as much as I would other Hitchcock things, but it's breezy. Like you mentioned, Travis, hour and 20 minutes. I mean, the movie starts and then it's over, and there's no lull in the action. So definitely not. It's not a burden to get through this movie, and so I would gladly watch it another time. But it's probably not a movie I would seek out to regularly watch, unless I was taking your drama class and forced to watch certain scenes.
Fair enough. Yeah, I do think you mentioned the runtime, and it really helps this movie. I think if they had stretched this into an hour 45, that oneer thing, it would have faded on even me, and I've been the one waving the flag saying it works the whole time. So I think the pacing and the tightness of the storytelling is probably its best aspect. Yeah, I think this movie is really well put together from a conceptual point of view, in my opinion. I do think it's a matter of if that works for you or doesn't, and I think there's totally like fair sides of the aisle to be on. Like, it was distracting and it could have been better with cuts, or I think from my perspective, I'm really reading this as like a beautifully filmed theater piece, because what was asked of the actors is really not like normal film acting stuff. When you have to act in 10-minute takes, you're not rehearsing the same way. You're not performing the same way. You're not blocking and moving, and everything's different, So I think everybody's firing on all cylinders here. No pun intended. And the direction is as tight as it could be. The story has a lot of interesting stuff to say. There's class versus class stuff in here. There's the idea of just like, is human life sacred? And they that comes to a head with Jimmy Stewart's monologue at the end. There's again, like Justin said, like straight up references to Nietzsche. So if you want to chew on an interesting story, there's certainly no shortage of that here. And I think there's a couple really fun lines of dialogue kind of peppered throughout that are cheeky, like darkly humorous. There's a line early on where someone says the Mrs. Atwater, Justin says, "These hands will bring you great fame." You know what I mean? And from her character's perspective, that's just like, she's reading his palm or whatever. But we know as it's just a fun, the audience is in on it thing. So I think this movie does invite you into the scene in an engaging way. I would rewatch this probably once every couple of years, just because it scratches that sort of theater adaptation into a film done really well itch, which I fully admit is a specific flavor. And definitely worth people's time. Yeah. All right. Well, I first want to thank Ben one more time from Three Films and a Podcast. Thanks for being here, man. You were great.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Go check out Three Films and a Podcast. All the guys over there are great. They do some great coverage, and they're fun. They don't take themselves too seriously. It's a good time. Justin, next week we have, I think, something that neither of us have seen and should be really interesting.
Yes.
Stray Dog by Akira Kurosawa.
Yeah, man, I'm excited. I haven't seen it and can't wait.
Yes, should be good. We hope you'll join us, and we will see you next week, folks. Bye.
Adios.
Let the movie speak.
Mouse, cat and mouse. Which is the cat and which is the mouse? Enough of that.
Hey, since you're still here and still listening, thank you, by the way, we'd like to ask an additional favor of you.
We have social media. It's a thing on the internet, and all you need to do is find us on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook and like and subscribe. I know this is annoying, but we have to ask you because we want more people to hear the show. In addition to that, if you could rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, we would greatly appreciate it. See you next week. Bye.